I will. They helped me upstairs. Good evening. Welcome to the sanctuary of First Baptist Church of Rochester. I'm Reverend Joanne Gilbert Cannon, the senior pastor here, and we are just the hosts, nothing more. This lovely brainchild came from a phone call from Kevin, and he will go into that more. There are exits there and there in both directions and straight out. There's a bathroom right behind you off the bride's room. It doesn't look like a bathroom, but if you go right into that little bride's room back there, there's a bathroom. And if you go down the hall that way, there's a men's and a women's room. Welcome to First Baptist Church.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Kevin Gore. I'm the rector at Christ Episcopal Church in Pittsford. I want to welcome you all here this evening. I am not going to take any credit for this either. This is my outreach committee's brainchild. And their connections with the Housing Action Collective. Just a quick note to say welcome. We're glad you're here this evening. These are obviously important things that we want to know about, want to discuss, want to see where we can support and work towards a better common existence here in Monroe County. After the presentation and conversation this evening, please join us for a reception off to the left back there. And without any further ado, I'm going to introduce the Housing Action Collective, Family Promise, and Janelle, I think you're up first. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It's so good to be here, and what a great crowd. So I'm Janelle Duda. I am part of the Housing Action Collective, along with the other panelists that we have here today, and some folks who aren't here today as well. So it was a group of us that came together in the spring of 2024 to do something about the housing crisis. We saw that there was a lot of work that needed to be done, and we didn't quite see a plan. We didn't see anything really coming out of the county to address homelessness specifically. So we came together, a number of stakeholders, to try to make some noise and get out and really educate the community about homelessness. And so we're doing these forums, getting out into any town, suburbs, done some in the city as well. So if you can think of any, if you have any other ideas or any other places who may want to host us, we're happy to show up and be there. And then we also have, we're now under, the Housing Action Collective is now under Family Promise of Greater Rochester, formerly RAIN, for some folks who may remember RAIN. And I am newly there. I'm the executive co-director of advocacy and fund development there, and the Housing Action Collective kind of falls under me. So today, or tonight rather, we've got a panel of folks who are going to discuss different topics around the housing crisis. So I'm going to first start with the scope and causes of homelessness. Then we're going to have Patrick Hanna speak about the cost of homelessness. Then we're going to have Reverend Peter Peters talk about the dignity of people experiencing homelessness and the connection to faith as housing as a human right. And then we're going to have Kim Hunt-Uzlak speak about family homelessness. And then we're going to have Andy Carey talk about solutions. So the entire sort of panel, or our goal here, is to share that there are solutions to the crisis. So we're not here just to ring the alarm and have no idea as to what can be done. We have a lot of different ideas. And then we're going to open it up to question and answer. So that's where it can really get lively, and we're excited to answer any questions that you have. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started here. Next slide, please. Oh, and I'm going to present some data, so there's going to be quite a bit of information on the slides. So I love that there's a large crowd. You may want to move a little closer. It's fine as we're talking. If you realize you can't see the monitor that well and you move on up, no problem. So that won't be disruptive at all. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Next slide, please. All right, so like I said, I'm going to focus on the scope of homelessness, and we're really focused on local homelessness here in Monroe County. But before I get to the data, I want to talk about the past, as homelessness is not a new phenomenon. So homelessness was first documented here in the U.S. in the 17th century when European settlers displaced Native Americans, removing people from their homes with nowhere to go. And then about 100 years later, in the 1730s, the first almshouse opened in the U.S., there's a depiction of that on the slide here, which those almshouses had very strict rules and requirements, as there's a long history in our country of those in power thinking they know what is best for others. Next slide, please. Then another 100 years later, in the 1830s, there was a financial crisis. A major depression began, which resulted in thousands and thousands of people who were sleeping in the police stations at night. So in response, homeless shelters started to open up across the country, including here in Rochester. So for example, many people are familiar with the Salvation Army. This is around the time when the Salvation Army opened up. And then I have a photo here of the Rochester Home for the Friendless, which at first was a shelter for women. Next slide, please. And then this slide, that's Andrew Street, the Andrew Street Bridge there, again, also from Rochester, and it's a little hard to see, but in the background is the People's Rescue Mission, another shelter that opened up. Next slide. And then around the turn of the century is when we began to legislate labels on people who are homeless, like hobo and tramp. So it was assumed that a hobo is looking for work, while a tramp is traveling, but supposedly to avoid work. So this led to the Tramp Act, which essentially criminalized being homeless, which you can see. This photo is from Rochester, so this was enacted here in Rochester as well. So the able-bodied people tramping through the country asking for assistance will be arrested. Next slide, please. Okay, so then in 1929, the Great Depression hit, and this was the first time that the federal government finally steps in to address homelessness. And so what was the solution? Housing and jobs. It's really not rocket science. So solutions like housing projects, credit for home repairs, and employment. And while FDR's New Deal was indeed effective for a number of folks, these solutions did not last as the years went by. So let's go to the present. So here we have on the left, New York City, 1932, and then we have Rochester, 2024. Next slide, please. All right, so let's get to some of the data around homelessness. So for those of you who don't know, annually, the federal government organizes a count of people experiencing homelessness. And so it's one day of year, it's in January every year, where folks volunteer to go out and count the number of people who are homeless, and this also includes people who are in the shelter. So the shelters report their census as well. And so the data that I'm going to present here is from what's called the point in time, or the PIT count. So the PIT count has shown that homelessness has continued to increase in our community across Monroe County for the last few years. In the last just 2 years, homelessness has increased 50% in our community. So we have at least 1,200 people who this year are experiencing homelessness. That number is much higher, and I'm going to get to it, but according to this data, that's 1,200 people. And then there's different sort of subpopulations of people within experiencing homelessness. So people experiencing chronic homelessness, we're seeing extreme surges in chronic homelessness in our community. It's more than doubled in the last 2 years. We're also seeing increases in unsheltered homelessness. And then Kim's going to talk a little bit more about family homelessness, where we're also seeing increases. But no matter which way you slice it, homelessness continues to surge in our community, yet we don't see a plan from government to address this crisis. So let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so this is a visual representation of the same data that I just showed you, or that I just discussed, but over the last 15 years when the federal government first began counting homelessness. And even if you're in the back, you should be able to notice that homelessness is, again, at an all-time high in our community since we started counting homelessness. So it's just continued to increase. However, the point in time count misses a number of people who are experiencing homelessness. We don't go into vacant buildings. We don't count people who are doubled up, tripled up, right, staying on someone's couch. We don't count people who are maybe staying in a toxic or unsafe relationship because they have nowhere to go. And many people who are experiencing homelessness, they actually are hiding. They don't want to be found for fear of maybe authorities maybe getting arrested, or if they have children, CPS being called on them. So we know that there's an undercount. So what I wanted to do was look at, well, what are some other ways that we may be able to get a better sense of how many people are experiencing homelessness in our community? So next slide, please. So the Department of Education has a way that they also have a way in which they count students who are experiencing homelessness in our community. And that count is a little bit different, and that's the data that I have presented here. And one thing that I want to highlight, first of all, the most recent data across Monroe County for student homelessness is the 22-23 school year. So I compared the number of students in Monroe County who are identified as homeless, which is about more than 3,400 students. But if you look at the point in time count for 2023, they only counted, I think it's 244 children. So huge disconnect there in terms of really how many people are experiencing homelessness in our community. And this chart also is showing that the number of students experiencing homelessness across our county is returning to pre-pandemic levels, so it's increasing. Next slide, please. That looks a little weird, but you can still see the trend there, or the line. So this chart, I was able to actually just look at student homelessness in the towns and suburbs in our community. So I pulled out all the city data here. And one thing that I noticed is that increase that we're seeing across the county in student homelessness is being driven by student homelessness in our towns and suburbs. So just to remind folks here that homelessness is not a city problem, it's a community problem. It's happening across our entire community, while people may end up going into the city because that's where services are, that's where there's more access, better access to transportation, and so on. Many of those folks actually come from communities like here, like Pittsford, right? Next slide, please. Okay, no one's going to be able to see this one, so you're just going to have to trust me. Another data point that I wanted to look at was 211 calls. Are people familiar with 211? I'm seeing heads nod. If you are looking for, assistance with any sort of community service, you call 211 and you can just say, hey, my water got shut off. Who can I call? How can I get some help? And then they'll direct you to a service provider. So I looked at the 211 calls across Monroe County over the last year, and a third of the calls and the most common calls were for housing assistance. So that's the number one need that people are calling for in our community. And there were 17,300 calls for housing assistance in the last year, which averages to about 50 calls a day in our community asking for housing assistance. And of that housing assistance, the most common requests are for shelter and rental assistance, with rental assistance being the number one need for folks. Yet we're not able to meet that need. And again, this is on the slide, but we're able to identify when someone calls and says that they need rental assistance, was there an agency that the 211 operator could actually connect the person to? We don't know if they actually got rental assistance, but was there an agency that provides this service, still has funding available? And in about 20% of those calls, there was no one that they could refer the person to. Next slide. Bear with me, it's one more. Again, 211 calls. I just looked at the last month, or the month of September, across Monroe County, and the bad news is the numbers are just going up. So the number of people requesting housing assistance is continuing to go up, and now we have even more people requesting rental assistance, and a higher rate of an inability to actually connect people to a service provider. And now, I said over the last year, it was an average of 50 calls a day. In the last month, across our community, it was an average of 65 calls a day. So again, the need is continuing to go up. Next slide, please. So my colors are not as vibrant as they usually are on these slides, but this slide is eviction filing. So that's another way that we could get a sense of homelessness in our community, because oftentimes eviction does lead to homelessness. And what you'll see here is what over the last 10 years, evictions in our towns and suburbs, eviction filings, about 15% of eviction filings in Monroe County were in the towns and suburbs. That's now doubled. So 30% of eviction filings across Monroe County are in the towns and suburbs, while 70% are in the city. So again, showing that this is hitting everyone in the community. Next slide, please. All right, so I just want to share a little bit more, and then we're going to move on to the next panelist. So homelessness is changing. It's not what it was 10 years ago. More people are becoming unhoused faster, so we're seeing people come directly to shelter from a lease, and one of those reasons is that families are already doubled and tripled up. So in the past, when someone, maybe they were evicted or their lease ended, they could stay with family for a little bit. They can't anymore because family is already hosting 2-3 other people, so there's just no room. People are becoming homeless for the first time. One paycheck away from homelessness, right? Your car breaks down, and now you have to decide between, am I going to pay rent or am I going to pay for my car? I need my car to get to work, to get my kids around, to do anything in the community. So people have to make those tough decisions. And so people are becoming unhoused at rates surpassing people exiting homelessness. And that's because it's taking people much longer to get housing. Housing isn't available. I'm going to get to that next. And then compound that with people with serious mental illness, with substance abuse, it just becomes more and more difficult to get out of the cycle of homelessness. Next slide. Okay, the causes of homelessness. Homelessness is a policy decision. I want to be really clear on that. We could end homelessness. Our community could end homelessness. We did during COVID. We kept people in their houses. We kept people in their apartments. So we could end it. So the number one driver of homelessness in this community, it's been in the news. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but it's the lack of accessible, affordable, available housing for folks, particularly our lowest income community members. So that's the number one cause. In our towns and suburbs, there's only 2.6 affordable, available housing units available for every 10 folks who need housing. So housing is just becoming more and more scarce in our community. Some of the other causes, lack of a living wage. I think median wages for those, for renters in our community has only increased 2% in the last 4 years. Meanwhile, rent has increased 22%. So people aren't able to afford where they're living. Inflation, we're all feeling inflation. In the last 2 years, food prices have increased more than 15%. So additional cost there. Inadequate safety net, so people having really difficult time in our community getting on temporary assistance, so getting the public assistance benefits and then maintaining those benefits as well. Racial inequality, so we have a history of redlining in this community. We have black women renters who have much higher rates of eviction filings than their white counterparts. So a number of different aspects of race that are impacting this. And then mass incarceration, while we've done better around that, when you are incarcerated, that can impact your ability to get a good paying job. Okay, next slide. Okay, I think this is my last one. So all of that is to say, we have thousands and thousands of people in our community who are experiencing homelessness. And we need to do something about it. Our emergency shelter system is overburdened and at capacity. We have shelters that are closing. We have shelters that are reducing their bed count because of funding issues. And just to be clear, the city plays a role in this, certainly, but the county is actually who is responsible for addressing homelessness in our community. And so, and housing is healthcare. So, I mean, I think most people in this room can understand that if you don't have a stable place to be, to stay, to lay your head down at night, it's really hard to imagine doing anything else, right? Going to work, going to doctor's appointments, getting your kids places, or so housing is so critical to the ability to thrive. And so we really need to make sure that we're responding in a responsive, robust, coordinated, multi-pronged approach. And the last thing I'll say is that it makes economic sense as well, which is what Patrick Hanna is going to talk about. So I think I'm done. Next slide, please. Okay. So Patrick Hanna, he's now retired, but he has an extensive background in business and engineering, including working at Xerox, and he's currently a Family Promise board member. He's going to present now on the costs of homelessness.
Good evening. Janelle had said that we wanted to make some noise about the homeless situation in Monroe County. The noise I want to make is, what does it cost all of us as taxpayers to support homelessness in the county? Because we have no grand solutions to decrease the number of people that are affected. So we're paying to keep this situation in place. Now, can I have the next slide, please? In 2024, I did some research of what does it cost to support the homeless, and it ranged from $35,000 to $100,000 per person per year, and that's to access crisis-related, short-term, high-price community services, the police, the fire, EMS services, court systems, jails, all of that. When there is a crisis, these professionals come in, they resolve whatever issues there are, and the homeless go back out on the street once the issues are resolved, until the next crisis comes along. And these professional services come into play again. And you're on a treadmill. This is a repeating cycle. There are no long-term solutions. I call this my homelessness cycle. Okay, and for a lot of people, the only off-ramp is death. That's kind of rough. So, in looking at the range from $35,000 to $100,000, I want to work just with the chronically homeless population. They will probably be at the upper end of that price range. However, I want all my projections, all my numbers to be conservatively based. I really believe in the numbers that I've got because I know they're low, okay? PID counts are low. The chronically homeless are going to be at the upper end of that price spectrum. I don't want to be up there. So I just want to give you an indication of what it is we are paying, and you can always know that we're paying a lot more than that. May I have the next slide, please? So for 2024, chronically homeless is 181 people. And if I take the midpoint of that price range from $35,000 to $100,000, I get $67,500 at 181 people, $12.2 million. It's starting to be real money, okay? So 2024 is gone, 2025 is here. I want to make some projections to say, basically, if we don't do anything about the problem, we can expect at least it to grow to these types of numbers. So I grew the pit count 20% per year, because from 2023 to 2024, it was more than a 2x growth. 2024 to 2025 was 30%. So I say going forward, I only want to use 20%. On the midpoint of the services at 67,500, I only grew that 2% per year, which is well below the rate of inflation. So I'm comfortable with my numbers. So as they go up, now in 2025, I've got 236. Now that's not my projection, that is a pit count. $68,900 per person. I'm at $16,300 that Monroe County taxpayers have. I said thousand, 16,300,000. And as I go forward to 26, 27, that number grows to 20,000 and 24.4 thousand. They're low. I fully believe in my numbers. I can fully support my numbers, because if I tried to think about what the real numbers are, they far exceed what I've got here. Now, this is one side of what taxpayers have to pay to support homelessness. Now, on the other side, there are things going on that I know they're going on, but I don't know the magnitude of the costs that people are burdened with. May I have the next slide, please? We have business revenue and cost impacts. Now, when you have a homeless population that is in a retail area, and it is large, there are business impacts to the shop owners in that area, because you as a buying public will say, I don't want to be there because I don't want the aggressive panhandling. I don't want to be tiptoeing through a bunch of people laying all over the sidewalks. I don't want to be seeing needles on the pavement, things like that. So I'm going to take my purchasing dollars elsewhere. Well, that's a revenue impact to those retail shops. That's money that they miss because your concern of your personal safety, for your personal safety, comes first. And then the shop owners, being in that type of environment, they have high costs of insurance, because the insurance companies know what's going on, and high costs for security. Now, a little lived experience of myself, but it comes from Philadelphia. I'm from Philadelphia. My parents had 3 retail stores, and they belonged to a business association. Everybody in this business association, and that include, we had laundromats, there were bars, there were exterminators, there were people that, clothing stores, hairdressers, all types of businesses. They all had the same concerns when it came to security and insurance. And some of them said, I can't afford the insurance. I will go with the security. And what they had, what we all had, was there's a person at the door to watch who's going out, to make sure things were paid for that were coming out. There were mirrors around. There was closed-circuit TV recording. We had bars or shades, metal shades that come down in front of the glass storefronts, and you had monitored systems so that the police or the fire could be called if something happened while the store was closed. That's a lot, you know, and With my parents, we had laundromats, and some people thought, well, we don't have that problem. Well, we had that problem. We had that problem in spades because people would actually come into the laundromat and take the clothes. They didn't take the clothes out of the washers because they're too heavy. They'd stick around, and we had signs all over all the stores, "Stay with your clothes. We are not responsible for your clothes." But they know how long the wash takes, so they'll do the wash and they'll go do something else and come back. They know how long the dry takes, they'll do the dry and they'll come back. Now, somebody watching the situation says, well, you know, they've been drying for 10, 15 minutes. They're light enough for me to put in a bag and take out. And, you know, maybe I can wear something, maybe not. Maybe my kids can wear something, maybe not. I can sell them. Okay, so we all had something to deal with that was kind of hard. Now, in the neighborhood where there are large groups of homeless, people don't want to buy property, real estate, for the same reasons. You know, you see all of this around, you say, no, I don't want to buy in this area. Either I don't like the way it looks now, or I'm looking and say, this is just going to get worse. So it looks okay today, tomorrow may be a whole different story. So they take their purchasing dollars elsewhere, okay? And then those that do own property have the same problems: security, high insurance, okay? And what happens here is as the homeless population grows in a particular area, now again, I am going to speak about my experience in Philadelphia. As the homeless population grows, property values come down. And property values get to a point where you start to get the interest of investors. The investors will come in and they will offer a decent price. So now they're the new owners. They will kick out the renters. And a lot of people say, well, when a neighborhood is turning over, where do the people go? Some of them are candidates for the street. They just have to find somewhere where they can live, wherever they can afford or not. The property is renovated, updated to new, and put either up for sale or back up for rent at prices that those that left can't afford. So we have the start of gentrification, and whole neighborhoods turn over. We've had some neighborhoods in Philadelphia when I was a kid that were slummy. Today, these places go for $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 because investors did that. And they used to ask, well, where'd the people go? I don't know where the people went. So that's what I've had. We've got a problem. We really need to find a good solution to minimize the impacts of all of this. And with that being said, I'll turn it back over to Janelle.
Next slide, please. Okay, make sure, yeah. So next up, we have Reverend Peter Peters, who many of you know. He's a retired Episcopal priest, co-founder of Reach Advocacy, and he's been committed to this work for decades. He's going to talk about the housing crisis from a faith perspective.
Good day. Thank you for all turning out. I spent many years on this East End side of the county as the rector of St. Luke's in Fairport. My task is to connect our faith roots and the values we share to meet the needs of men and women and young people who are experiencing homelessness. What I hope you will take away from this section of the presentation is that we must stop blaming the victims of a failing housing system and work together to change the systemic forces which is failing to shelter all who need shelter. Next slide, please. Hospitality is central and inaugural event in the world's great wisdom traditions. It marks that moment when the self opens to the stranger and welcomes what is foreign and unfamiliar into its home. Most major wisdom traditions share a sacred commitment to hosting the stranger. I think you will agree that most of our faith traditions is this notion that when we gather as a congregation, we do so as those who have become aware of the sacred value of every person with whom we share in prayer. This then deep-seated awareness is taken out into the wider community as we recognize that all people are sacred and need to be treated with dignity. Next slide. Here are 3 of the Abrahamic traditions and texts that enforce that. In Judaism, from Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. I am God. Christianity, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. And in Islam, serve Allah and join not any partners with him, and do good to parents, kinsfolk, orphans, those in need, neighbors who are near, neighbors who are strangers, the companion by your side, the wayfarer. Someone speaking? Okay. As you know, in the Christian narrative, Jesus was asked, "Who is my neighbor?" And you know the story. He responded with a well-known story of the Good Samaritan, who took care of a man who'd been robbed and injured. What's ironic is we all read that differently, because in short, Jesus did not answer the question, "Who is my neighbor?" Instead, he answered the question, "How am I a neighbor to another?" Let me tell you about some of the neighbors we have come to know over the years of working with people facing homelessness. Next slide. Tamantha. Tamantha is a woman in her 50s. She came north to be with her son and grandchildren. She has a daughter who is a teacher living in the south. Tamantha is well educated and used to work in a bank. But soon after coming here, she found herself in a situation where she felt abused. Her son is an addict and failed to restrain his children, who treated Tamantha poorly. Tamantha began sleeping in her car. A reach worker found her and brought her to the shelter. Tamantha qualified for Ishai-funded housing, that is the Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative. Sorry, I never get it right. she paid all the bill, and she found an apartment. And she was so excited, I can remember that. And the management said, "You will not fit in here." As a result, Tamantha stayed with us much longer than she expected. It took her over a year to find an apartment. The system did not work for her. Brian was an unsheltered man seeking a temporary housing assistance from DHS. Brian had regular income from SSI benefits, but he needed assistance in a shelter to enable him to save enough for a down deposit and the first month's rent of an apartment. But then he learned that to qualify for temporary housing assistance, he had to have spent all of his money to qualify. He could not have any savings. All Brian wanted was a breathing space to save up the money he needed to get his own apartment. The system did not work for Brian. Cliff had a rough beginning in life. After his mother and father divorced when he was 3 years old, and then his mother remarried and 2 more children came on the scene, and then she divorced again. He said to me when I was talking with him several years ago, he said, "I felt like an outsider in my family." Eventually he married when he was quite young. He had a son, Michael. All seemed well. But then his wife pulled him into weekend parties and introduced him to crack cocaine as a way to unwind. He became a functioning addict. Eventually it led to him being fired from his job and becoming homeless. I met him after he'd been drug-freed for over a month, but was discouraged about how hard it was to find an apartment. The system was not working for Cliff. Next slide. You know what home is. When you have a home, whatever form it takes, rent or ownership, it's how people flourish. It's where we find safety. It's where our basic needs are met. It's where our sense of identity is shaped and where our wounds are healed, where our deepest relationships are formed. Central to all of the stories I just told you are people's longing for safe, affordable, and supportive housing. As Janelle has pointed out eloquently, the system is not producing that kind of housing. Next slide, please. We need to conclude that it is the housing system that is failing. The primary driver in our housing system is profit. Market-driven housing development does not meet the housing needs of those on very low incomes or with special needs. Janelle gave you the stats on that. The one I know, she did it for 10, I did it for 100. If you come to Rochester looking for a home and you're living less than 30% of the AMI, there are 37 units out of every 100 people looking. Housing vouchers, which many of us know about, except the list gets cut off. You know, you can't get title out now. Housing vouchers are more about protecting investors than security of housing. We need other avenues to secure housing, such as social housing or public housing. The result is that more and more, the rent is too high, and for those who are paying rent, they are paying a higher portion than what HUD says is appropriate. They're paying more than 30% of their income on housing. Now I want you to do the math. If you took 30% of your income and that was your total cost for housing, what would that do to you? And if you're working 2 jobs to afford that, what would that do to you? The system is not working for those that need shelter. So I want to pose a question to you. Next slide, please. As people of faith who know no strangers, all are welcome. That's what we say. Now we have to practice it. Perhaps we should look at our own understanding of human rights. What if we began by saying that housing is a human right? What a revolutionary thought that would be. The US has been expanding the ideas of rights since its foundation. First, we said no slavery. Then we said women have the right to vote. And then we said we needed civil rights to make sure that everybody got the right to vote who were eligible. And then we said people should have the right to marry whom they love. What about housing as a human right? From a faith point of view, there is no question that people who are cast outside need to be welcomed somewhere. Can we use land trusts as a way to keep some housing perpetually affordable? Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you some tasks. Will you do this? Many of you represent faith communities here. Faith communities have had a lot to do with changing our understanding of human rights. Faith communities marched with women on the streets for the vote. Faith communities marched with black communities to ensure that they had the right to vote. Faith communities became anchor points for the debate around marriage equity. I'm inviting you to think about faith communities as being the place where we have a march for housing as a human right. So when you go back to your faith community, can you start a study group to better understand housing as a human right? Will you then write to your legislators to gain their support for public housing? For the past 20 years, HUD has not developed any significant public housing. There are still several million people living in public housing, and some being managed very well and very decorative and very nice. I've driven around the country looking at them. Public housing doesn't have to be a ghetto. Can you join local housing justice movements such as the Rochester Citywide Tenants Union. They did a great job last 2 years when they got no-cause eviction passed by the city legislators. But you can be active in that sort of movement. I have a number of books that Scott Clifton, who's right over there, and I wrote on housing as a human right. It's got some interesting resources for you if you're interested in following up on this. I've got 10 of these. If you've got a community that you're ready to talk to about housing as a human right, and you want to delve a little more deeply into this question, you can have one of these. But please don't ask if you're just going to take it and put it on the shelf. Thank you.
Okay. Next up, we have Kim Hunt-Uzlak, who is Executive Co-Director of Programs and Operations at Family Promise of Greater Rochester, where she's been for over 15 years. Her expertise in care and concern and compassion around family homelessness is really going to come through in her presentation.
Good evening. How are we all doing? You okay? It's heavy material, right? Yeah, but we promise we do have solutions, and Peter shared a few of them, so hang in there. Because it's going to get sad here. It's going to continue to be sad with family homelessness. Sorry. But I think it's important to share the reality of what we're facing as a community. Okay, so we start every gathering at Family Promise with a reading of our vision and mission, and tonight I'm going to read the vision for you all. I think it's a good reminder of why we're gathered together tonight. Family Promise of Greater Rochester will have achieved success when affordable, decent, equitable housing is seen as a human right, and every family has a place to call home. Next slide, please. So Peter talked about this a bit in his presentation, but this is time for you all to participate in our discussion tonight. So I want you to share out, and you can share loudly, what words come to mind when you think about home. Family? Okay. Comfort? Security, warmth, food, yep, important. Love, yep. So those are all great descriptors of home. And those are all things that most of us experience, right? When we leave here tonight, will most of you go to that place where you have those things? I know I will. So most of us will return to a place that we consider home, where our things are. Maybe our kids are there. Maybe our pets are there. We'll go to sleep tonight in a bed, in a room that's full of comfort, hopefully, ideally, right, and security and safety and love. Next slide, please. I think we can all agree that to thrive, every family needs a home. Would we all agree with that? Yes. Next slide, please. So that's what we're working on at Family Promise. Many of you are familiar with Family Promise, formerly known as RAIN, correct? Yeah. But we have grown, so I thought I'd take a moment tonight and share with you where we are currently and how we are helping families work toward achieving safe, decent, affordable, equitable housing. So our shelter program, which many of you are familiar with, you may have been involved with our rotation model back in our beginnings, our origins, where we hosted families in congregational space. And I really thought about the concept when we talked earlier tonight about the concept of hospitality, because that was the origin of that care, was hospitality in congregational space. We changed that model with COVID. Many of you probably know this. And we are now using apartments, scattered site apartments in the community for shelter. We continue to be a shelter that accepts families. We're low barrier. The family continues to define their family unit. So we are LGBTQIA friendly. We continue to be. We are not a DHS shelter, so we've kept that. So we do not receive reimbursement for shelter stays, so we do not have any limits on the stay, and we are really free to provide compassionate, individualized care, as we always did for every family that comes into our shelter program. In 2019, we added aftercare, we added prevention and diversion. And this is now our largest program, where households can request a funding for rental arrears or security deposit. We have a portal that is on our website that's open the first 3 business days of each month. And I'll go into a little bit more statistics a bit later to show the need for rental arrears and security deposit assistance. We continue to provide the aftercare and stabilization program, which is actually why I was hired 15 years ago to start that program. So that follows up with families when they transition into permanent housing to ensure their stability. Last year, we added transitional housing, so you can see how we've been growing, right? We added the transitional housing program. We were able to purchase our building at 142 Webster Avenue. There are 4 apartments on the 2nd floor of that building that we have renovated and turned into transitional housing. We entered a partnership with City Roots Community Land Trust last year, and we were able to acquire 2 additional buildings for $1 each, believe it or not. But extensive renovation is needed on these buildings, which we are doing right now. So when all the renovations are done, we will have a total of 11 units for housing for families, all 3 buildings owned by Family Promise. So it's pretty incredible. We just finished renovations on one of the apartments at Council Street. We had a family of 3 move in, mom and 2 children, as part of our transitional housing program. I was thinking about them on the way here. I don't know why they came into my mind, maybe because I was thinking about tonight's talk, but she is so filled with joy at having this apartment. It's the first time that her kids have had their own bedrooms. It's a 3-bedroom apartment. So we're just so happy as an organization to be able to continue providing compassionate care for families and expanding that care. We added the ROC Housing Navigation Program this year. That's really complementary to everything else we do in that it assists households in locating housing. There's not a lot of it, but we have a housing navigator that works with families and individuals to locate affordable, decent housing, and then we have an aftercare manager that we've hired to follow up with those families after they find housing for 6 months. And we just added an advocacy arm, which that's what this is, the Housing Action Collective, and Janelle came on board through that ad. So we've grown a lot, right, as an organization. Next slide, please. Okay, a lot of data on this slide, so bear with me. It'll make sense as we go through it. So Janelle talked about the point-in-time count. This is the point-in-time count for households with children. And I want, as you're looking at these numbers, I want you to remember 2 things, right? That this is a severe undercount, and that homelessness amongst families is a hidden, invisible phenomenon, right? Because as Janelle also pointed out, most families are doubled up or tripled up or quadrupled up these days. A lot of families are sleeping in cars. Some families are sleeping in abandoned buildings. I just got an email today, actually, from a mom who's sleeping in an abandoned building with her 6-year-old. So it's a reality in our community. So as you're looking at the point in time numbers, again, more sad news. In 2019, the point in time had 83 households with children that they counted. And if you look at 2025, it's increased to 133 households, which is a 61% increase since 2019. If we look at internal statistics, so we're going to look at next, the middle column, family promise shelter calls. So this is a log that we keep when a family calls for shelter, they go on to an at capacity log. So it's any family that calls that we can't accept into shelter at the time of the call because we are at capacity. So you can see by the numbers, in 2019, this number, total number for the year was 309 families. This increased to 978 families in 2024, and we're well on our way to meet or exceed that number in 2025. We get so many calls for shelter. At least, I would say 5 a day, if not more. So it's a 78% increase since 2019. The last column is data from our prevention and diversion program, and I talked about that, with the portal that opens on the first 3 business days of each month. So during those 3 days, we get anywhere from 200 to 400. Lately, it's been more of the 400 requests per month from households in need of funding for rental arrears to prevent an eviction or security deposits to maintain housing. We are able to assist 12 to 15 households per month. So we are able to assist about 5% of those households in need each month. And think back to what we presented earlier about the 211 Lifeline calls coming in, that over 30% of them are coming in for housing-related calls, and the majority of those are for rental assistance, and only 1 out of 5 of the calls are referred or able to be assisted. So that's, matching our data. Next slide, please. More demonstration of need. So this is a budget of a family that participated in one of our programs. And we've touched on this also, how much of a household's income should be spent on housing. So you can see that this family's monthly income is $1,940. The household is a working household, full-time working. Rent is $1,300, and you can see utilities, a car payment, phone, internet, food. I mean, look at the food. $300, that's like what, a week's worth of groceries these days? Leaving a negative balance of $446 each month. And this is a true budget. So you can see that housing is just not sustainable at that rate with stagnation of wages. It just doesn't add up. And 67% of this income, household's income, is spent on rent, which is actually pretty low. Most of the families that we work alongside spend 80 to 90% of their income on rent. And the other thing I will say about this is the car payment and car insurance, that's pretty low for this household. I will say, though, that families will pay their car payments and insurance before they pay their rent often, because they know if they lose their housing, they will have to sleep in their car. That's a reality, sadly. Next slide, please. So we're moving on to some positivity. I mentioned that we had started a transitional housing program at Family Promise, and that we will have 11 apartments by the time the renovations are complete across three buildings, 142 Webster Avenue, 151 Webster Ave, and 392 Portland Avenue. Families pay below market rent for up to 2 years in this program. So a one-bedroom apartment is $550, two-bedroom apartment is $650, three-bedroom apartment, the family that just moved in, it's $850 for a three-bedroom. So you can see by the pictures that this is one of the apartments that we've renovated. We were having a lot of fun renovating apartments. We were able to renovate the apartments at 142 Webster Avenue, all three apartments, for about $11,000, thanks to volunteer work. That's not the case with the two buildings that we've acquired. They will cost significantly more. But one of the ways that you all can get involved is to help us with some of the renovations, and we'll talk about that a bit later. There's so many vacant buildings in Rochester. They're in states of significant disrepair. But as this group has come in front of City Council to talk about homelessness and the housing crisis in our community, and they ask us, well, what can be done? And I always say, like, if Family Promise can take two buildings and come up with the money to repair the buildings and get families housed, then other organizations can do it. Next slide, please. A few more pictures of the renovated spaces on the second floor at 142 Webster Avenue. I'm sharing these to show that when care and compassion is put into spaces, that's translated to the families. They feel that, right? They feel that respect and that care. Next slide, please. So it's so very important to do what we're doing tonight, to come together as a community, to learn about the issues, but it's not enough to just learn about the issues and let them sit in your heart and soul. It's important that we have a vision, that we come together and act. So let's envision a community where every family has a home and a chance to build a better future. And we can do this. We're going to next talk about solutions. So with collective care and love and compassion, we can create a better world. And of course, some funding. That's a necessity. Thank you.
All right, and finally, we have Andy Carey, co-founder of MC Collaborative, which provides wraparound services and care management to our community members with a focus on people experiencing chronic homelessness. So he's a social worker in the streets. He knows everyone who's homeless in this community. He works with many of our chronically homeless community members, and he's going to talk about solutions.
I guess we can do the next slide. I'm really happy to be up here because I get to talk about something positive, like solutions after, obviously, the house is on fire. We're in the middle of a housing crisis, an opioid epidemic, all sorts of things are going on in our community. I've had the privilege, basically, the past 20 years of being able to spend time in the streets, in shelters, abandoned houses, and traveling alongside people through their journey as they come out of homelessness, maybe go back into homelessness, and then hopefully improve their lives because they've touched people that care and show them some dignity and some respect. And throughout that time, I've been able to be on the streets, but I've also had to deal with the administrative side of the world. So my organization is funded federally, state, county, city. I've been a part of a lot of different housing programs, so I'm a person full of acronyms, and I see how they work. I see what does work and what doesn't work. So I'm here to provide some solutions to people. I guess we'll go to the next slide. So I think one of the most important things is really robust outreach with solutions. So I get a lot of social work interns, and over the past years, it's become very hard because it's really a profession. So it's like a plumber, and we have a tool belt, and it'd be like a plumber coming to your house and saying, I'd love to fix your sink, but I don't have a wrench. So good luck to you. And that's what we're doing a lot. So we've really learned to just kind of ally with people and work through issues because we don't have the tools available to change things. And there are tools that we could be made, and some of them are on a small scale, like what Family Promise is doing. Instead of 11 apartments, do 1,100. You know, give them the funding to do that kind of thing, because it works, and people benefit from it. So one of the biggest things for me is emergency shelters, and seeing them as care centers, not just a place where you lay down, it's a place where you change your life. So I was lucky enough to run into Peter and Sarah years ago, and we started some low barrier shelters. We just said, come and stay with us. You can spend the whole winter with us if you'd like. And that was amazing, because I was used to trying to find someone in an abandoned house, trying to find someone on the street, and all of a sudden everyone was with us. And the community pitched in with meals, and people just, it was amazing the difference you could make with some time and some safety. And so shelters are always a big thing in my heart. Very low barrier. We have to change our funding structures. We have to allow everyone to come inside. But sheltering is very important. I'm a big fan of overdose prevention centers. So some of the most visible and scary parts of homelessness is the opioid epidemic. So there are people all over the streets, and you see needles, and you see people laying around. They don't have to be out in the street doing that. There are overdose prevention centers where people could use, and then they would happen to have to run into some of us social workers who could use evidence-based practices to move people through the stages of change, inspire hope, all those types of things, but safely, so we can keep you alive until you're ready for treatment. Obviously, detox and rehab facilities are super important. We're getting a little better at that. We still need a lot more of it. And we need it to be a little more trauma-informed. So when we're working along the streets of, let's say, Lyle Ave, there's a lot of women mixed up in the sex trafficking world. And they need a very different style of detox and rehab than someone else would. So we need to expand that continuum considerably. I think that transitional housing and recovery housing is awesome. You know, that's really what REACH felt like, and that's what I've seen be successful. A place where someone can come in and not have to find an apartment in 7 days, or not have to fix themselves in 14 days. You have some time. Sometimes I can't even imagine coming off the street and then immediately having to do something after days or months of just grinding away outside, staying alive. So transitional housing is something we could expand. Medical respite is critical. So many people are discharged from the hospital to the street because there's nowhere to go. And really, with simple respite services, you wouldn't lose a limb because of whatever's going on. Your infections wouldn't take over your whole body. You know, so medical respite is key. We could do the next slide. And then I just start going through all the different programs we worked with. So single room occupancy, really cool community living with counseling, people watching your medications, all that type of thing. Tends to be a mental health style building, but a really effective way of helping people out. Group homes, there's a lot of times where just living in community is important. You need that extra support. I learned early on, I'll never forget, one of the first people I worked with, and I got a homeless guy, and I was so excited, you know. I got him rent, and I got his utilities covered. You know, notice how much I'm saying I did this, I did this, I did this. Put him in an apartment by himself. I went there a week later, he was gone. And then years later, he ran into me, and he said, oh, Andy, you're such a nice guy. I just had to do the apartment thing for you, but I didn't want to be there. He's like, I closed the door, and everything went quiet. And everything came down on me, and I had to get out of there. And I can understand that now. So okay, so not everyone needs their own apartment. You know, we need to think about those types of things. Treatments, apartments, rooming houses. I'm a really big fan of well-managed rooming houses that you can have a lot of people in one building, especially when you're in the middle of a housing crisis. You need to use all the housing stock you have. Campgrounds, there's some hardy folk and some other ways of doing campgrounds that are good. Reentry housing, that's a huge thing. You know, I know before pandemic, I think we're at like 48 arrests a day in Rochester. That also means probably 48 people are coming out of jail or prison a day. So how do you house people as they come out of prison? So reentry is really important. Safe havens, especially if you're trying to escape human trafficking, sex trafficking, we actually don't have a lot in that realm, which is always surprising to me. We have a really robust and cool, what we call safe court in Rochester, where people who are picked up for trafficking issues can go to safe court and they're offered rehab and all that type of stuff. But it doesn't, the services don't match. So more of that would be good. Building affordable housing, of course, and we like doing that. Tiny home communities, which are exciting. I hope we're going to break ground at some point on that pretty soon. Faith-based housing is always, I think, an option that works really well. I know Peter's been pushing too about, we have a lot of empty old churches. So can we turn those into housing? Can we turn old rectories into housing? Schools, that type of thing, through the faith community. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, I think preservation funds for landlords. A lot of the really small landlords that I work with that really are part of the community, live in the community, they can't afford to keep up their houses anymore with the rent levels. So everything has become so expensive, and if you're only making $1,500 a month at your house and you have a $30,000 roof to put on, you're in trouble. So supporting the good local landlords, I think, is very important. Obviously, rental arrears for tenants, we saw that the 211 calls, that is the call. Like, how in the world do I get caught up on my rent? You know, I missed work a few weeks or something happened and I can't get caught back up on my rent, and soon I'll be evicted. So, yeah, I think advocacy for tenant rights. I think Peter brought it up, citywide tenant unions doing a nice job, really pushing it, Vocal New York, trying to get more rights for the tenants. And then repurposing current structures. We talked a little bit about the schools, churches. Hotels would be amazing. We do have some empty hotels laying around Rochester that we could rehab. There's actually a state funding called Housing Our Neighbors with Dignity Act, the Honda funds. And they tried to do it in New York City. They were going to buy hotels and move people into them, but they couldn't afford them. New York City hotels are a little too expensive. So they said they could do it up here in Western New York, but we haven't activated that yet. So that's literally a funding source that could fix up a hotel and turn it into housing for people. Warehouses as well. My hobby nowadays is I get to walk almost every day of the week, same time, same day, for the past 5 years or so. I count abandoned houses, that's my thing. And usually about 4 out of 10 of those, I think, could be turned over pretty quickly. Like, you could probably pull the plywood off the windows, do some minimal repairs, and they would be open. And we have over 8,500 abandoned houses in Rochester. So when you think about that we could put 3,200 houses on the market probably pretty rapidly, that's amazing. We only have about 3,200 homeless people, probably. So there are also great grounds to me for vocational training. People could come in, learn HVAC, drywall, everything else to rebuild these houses for our community. And then the abandoned houses, I also like the idea of maybe our neighborhood centers actually own them, like Family Promise. Maybe they diversify their income with a little rent, so they're not always dependent on grants and everything else, or with good local landlords taking them over. So next slide. Yeah, so this is the call to action part. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So we just wanted to end it with a slide that has, I mean, there's so many things that can be done, but some ideas for those of you who want to take some action. Peter also shared some ideas, and it kind of peppered throughout what everyone had to say. There were, you might have pulled out some things of, yeah, I could do that. So I'm not going to go through all this because I want to make sure we have some time for questions, but we can just leave it up here. I really encourage you to join Andy on Walking Street Outreach. Proximity is really important. He welcomes anybody to come and show up. Just let him know you're going to come. So I welcome you at the end of this if you want to just come up and take a picture with your phone of the slide, so that way you can contact him, or just go to Family Promise website, look up me, and you can email me and I can get you connected. Letter writing campaigns, I can help with that as well. If you want to volunteer at Family Promise, we have lots of volunteer opportunities as well. And I think I'm just going to leave it at that. We've shared a lot of information. Unfortunately, depressing, but I hope you feel like we ended on a more positive note with the numerous solutions that are out there. So I think I'm just going to kind of bring the rest of us up here, and we would love to answer any questions that you have. Did we scare everybody? Or comments?
Sorry. Where would you say is your, I guess, most pressing need for volunteers?
I would say with the transitional housing renovations. We have, just to give you an idea of like timeline, one of the apartments, the fourth apartment at council, it's 4 out of 4, the other 3 have been renovated, will be renovated with vacant rental improvement program funding that came through the state, so that's good. But the building across the street from 142 Webster Avenue, which is where our main offices are, needs total renovation. So once we get that started, I have talked to a few groups and a few individuals about helping out. It would save us money if we didn't have to pay a contractor to do everything. So if you were interested in painting or even drywalling, if you have a drywall expertise, furnishing, we just did this for the apartment that I referenced where we moved in the family of 3. We hooked up that family with a group from St. Joe's in Penfield. They talked to the family about what colors they wanted on the walls, what furniture they had to bring, and then that group at St. Joe's just kind of filled in with whatever else was needed with the family. Left them a beautiful welcome basket. So it was a really great way, like Janelle referenced, proximity to families that are experiencing poverty and housing crises. So that's a wonderful way to get involved. So if you're interested or anyone's interested, we can keep you up to date on the renovation timeline for across the street. Yes.
New York State has carved out $6 billion of Medicaid funding this year with the waiver, the 1115 waiver. Do you guys have access to that funding?
Yeah, we're really excited about it. This is actually, I'll try and be quick, kind of a funny story. I'm a little at capacity with what I normally do. So I was really lucky that I happen to be married to an MBA in health administration, and I said, hey, there's a ton of money sitting. Can we use this to help people? Would you mind helping do that? So she started a business for us, and we've begun doing it. And sitting right next to her is Scott, one of our true champions of it. It is unbelievable, the power of it. So the system is not well built out yet. It's having some problems getting going, but it is tackling that idea that social determinants, your housing, your transportation, your neighborhoods, all those things are what actually guide healthcare cost. So if I take care of your basic needs, you're not in the emergency room, you're not in long stays, healthcare costs come down. And that's the idea behind the Medicaid waiver. We're pushing it really hard, and we just started. I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of those solutions, especially when federal funding is very uneven, to say the least.
I'm actually the director of the food cupboard in Pittsford, and so we're working with FoodLink with Flippa, and we're the same way. We're ready to go, and they're not ready.
All right, good. Reach out to Bridget, she'll help you.
Hello, I'm Tim. I'm with Operation Caring Hearts. We're probably taking out about 200 to 300 meals a week in clothing, but we're looking at trying to get a building so we can do like a shelter. What would be the best way to connect it with that and get the funding to do it? Because some of these places are off the wall in pricing.
Yeah. Yeah, I really think that's where city advocacy could pay off. I do think that there is some taste in the city council right now to really work on homelessness and warehousing, clothing, furniture, that type of thing. So I think advocacy to the city is a good place to start, because if they feel like you have a plan and you're committed, they might get you a place for $1 if you're as good as Kim is at it. So.
I have a question. How do you decide only being able to help 5% of the needs that come in? How is that process handled?
It's very difficult. So our prevention and diversion team, when they close the portal on the third day, they are faced with a spreadsheet of 400 plus. In August, we had 648 requests. So it's a process of going through it and eliminating those that are ineligible. So you have to have children in the household age 18 years of age or younger. That's across most family promise programs. You have to be able to sustain rent going forward. So you have to be able to prove that going forward you are able to pay your rent, because if we make the payment, we want to make sure that you're able to stay in the house. We have to be able to hear from the landlord. So the landlord has to provide a ledger for rental arrears or a lease for a security deposit. We try to make it as low barrier as possible. We really don't have a lot of stipulations. We really put those stipulations in place because it's hard to choose. Yeah, we try to go by need. So if somebody, for a security deposit, if the Google form allows for a lot of narrative. So when families call, I say as much as you possibly can in the space that we give you on the Google form. So some families will indicate that they've been doubled up for many, many weeks and they have to get out, or they're facing eviction. That just shows that there's a greater need. But thank you for the question. It is very, very difficult.
I wanted to answer the question about where volunteers needed, or at least answer from one point of view. I'm an idealist in some respects, but I am impressed about this country. Yeah, you can tell I didn't come from here. I wasn't born here, but I chose to be a citizen, so I can speak now about politics. I've been impressed with how in the United States movements happen. And we're not shy of that happening. I went to No King's thing last Saturday. That has grown enormously. It's an incredible organization, and it's just being done by a few people. If you've got any capacity to help start a movement, you're needed. We need to talk about housing differently. The only way we talk about housing is through cost. We need to talk about housing as a human right. And if you have any capacity in helping to get movements going to change the story around housing, you're needed.
Discussions on the county level about this problem?
We're trying. They know that shelters are closing. They're aware. They know that homelessness is increasing. I think the county thinks that they're doing something. I don't think that they're trying to ignore it. They did provide, through some ARPA funding, The Rock Housing Navigator program at Family Promise, they funded that, and some other housing programs as well. But beyond that, particularly those who are street homeless, we're not, the county, as far as we know, is not having any deep discussion or strategy to address it. With that said, I think Kim referenced the expert testimony that a number of us participated in at the, with President Miguel Melendez, who's the president of City Council, 2 weeks ago, where he brought in a number of experts for an entire day. Everyone had like 10 minutes to speak about their experience around homelessness in our community. And he's putting together a report identifying what the city, what's under the city's purview, and then he really believes most of it will be under the county's purview. He's going to share that with the county. He's still working on how he's going to deliver it to them, because this isn't performative for him. He really wants there to be change. And so he's working on delivering that to the county. And so our hope is that the county will take it seriously, and then we can kind of jump on that, and we have some plans to meet with the president of the legislature to share basically the presentation that we just did for all of you. But that's where we're at. I don't know if anybody else.
How many emergency shelter beds will be available in Rochester for at night this winter? And how does this compare to last year?
Yeah, we're in a really bad spot. I'm just going to be frank. I was just talking with Anna from Open Door Mission. She's their executive director. And for the past 2 to 3 years, she's been crying out for help because she's had about 120 people in her shelter at all times. It's a maybe 60 to 80 bed capacity shelter. And it just got to the point of too dangerous. So she finally, and no one was helping, so she said, I'm done. I've got to close this down. And she did. And she moved to her other building where they have 50 beds. So that's 70 gone. Reach closed because of funding. And we did 80 beds. And in the winter, we'd be at about 120 people. So all those beds are gone. Sister Grace with Sister Rita has now been able to get a 20-bed shelter, which is the old Open Door Mission. They gave them a floor to help out. And the Code Blue planning has begun, but no one's really jumping up to do it. You know, it's a very hard thing to do anyways. So I do think I've heard there's a kind of warehouse style of sheltering that might be in order, but in no way is it going to make up for the beds we've lost. And a lot of the mainstay shelters have cut back on their beds because of funding. So Salvation Army, Catholic Charities, they've had to kind of scale back a little bit because of how the funding works in the middle of a housing crisis. So I have a feeling this winter's gonna be really bad. So another volunteer thing, if you like doing like Mylar blankets, sleeping bags, that type of thing, we'll take them because we'll be out there. So.
Is there still funding for Code Blue? Because I just didn't realize that's still happening. Good.
Yeah, so because it's a state regulation now, so it's in that you have to house from basically November 15th to April 15th in Rochester. You have to have space for people. So how you interpret that's interesting. You know, some people consider that means if you have a chair to sit in at a table, that's good enough. And then some people would prefer you have a cot or a room. But there is funding available, and the state has allocated the amount that each county gets. And they do that by our point-in-time counts. And so we'll get roughly the same amount of money we always get. It's just finding the providers to open. So.
Andy, can you explain our experience in Reach? One of the reasons we collapsed was because the way funding works for individual beds, and would it be better if we could get block grant funding for shelters? Maybe you could say something.
Yeah, I'll real quickly talk about a funding system. It's kind of in the weeds, but in our county and in New York State, what we do is we do a per diem, per night, per person system. So each person has to be qualified for temporary assistance at the county level. That's incredibly hard in the middle of an opioid epidemic. So you have to be going to treatment, mental health treatment. You have to be doing all these things. And if you're not, you're cut off. And then no funding goes to the shelter for you. You also have to have zero income, so you can have no savings. If you get your check at the beginning of the month, you're kicked out of the shelter. We didn't do that at Reach. We just hold people there, obviously. But in a regular per diem system, that's what happens. You have to leave until you run out of money, then you can come back. So any work that a social worker is doing with you gets interrupted for that time that you're kicked out. And then, so you also have to follow what's called an independent living plan, where you have to do a certain amount of apartment searches in a certain amount of time, and if you don't do them, you're out. And then there is a termination point where the county feels like you're not working hard enough at it, so then you're out anyways. And when you're out, because of that, you become sanctioned, and that means you can't re-enter shelter until you lift that sanction. So it's a really archaic, kind of almost like Elizabethan poor law type model that we have in New York State, and it needs to be changed. You should just give shelter providers the budget they need to be open. Believe me, we're going to move people in and move people out as soon as we can. But there's not that trust level. So it doesn't work very well, and that's why the shelters are closing, shutting down, getting smaller, because you can't count on your budget. You have no idea what you're going to get every month. So.
Those are state laws?
Well, it's interesting. It's called the Temporary Housing Regulations, and they put out guidance. And so it's your interpretation of it. So I've never met a policymaker that puts something out to be punitive, per se. So really, if you want to interpret it loosely, you could actually hold people in shelter for a long time. Our county tends to really strictly abide by it and try and kind of push on that side of it so that a lot of people don't stay in shelter. And I guess it's a decision made, I'm not sure why, but we have seen times where our county did it very flexible, and it was amazing the work we could do and the amount of people we could house. But that's changed since COVID.
So it sounds like we should be talking to legislators.
Absolutely, I love that, and that's part of the advocacy. Our state delegation actually tends to be really good, but they need to know that people care about it and what needs to be done. So absolutely, I think political push is a big thing.
So does it make more sense to push on the city, the county, or the state?
Yeah, I think that eventually it has to be the state. So who do we push on, the city, the county, or the state? Eventually it has to be the state. They're going to have to change, and I think they know it. So we really have to push on them. But what we can do locally, especially as suburbanites, is push the county to be more flexible, to reinterpret those policies in a manner that helps people rather than punishes them. It's that simple. It's a decision you make one way or the other. So that's a nice place to start, I think, with county, because they'll listen to you more, and I think that we can all push on the state.
I agree with your point about Rochester, like many communities in America, has a housing crisis as much as a homeless crisis. Can you tell us organizations that are effectively adding to housing in Rochester today? Who are they?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of our housing funding comes in development. So, you know, we have the big ones like Pastone and Conifer, and they're adding affordable housing. But really, organizationally, we don't have a lot of organizations that are focused on low-income affordable housing and doing it. So those grants are all state-based, and you know, it's amazing to see. I love the buildings. I love that people are getting decent affordable housing. but we're celebrating, I think it was $1.5 billion in investment, and we're getting maybe 3,000 units. If you do the math, it's like $500,000 a unit by the time it's done. And if we thought about that funding a little bit differently, I bet you for $500,000 we could do 7 or 8 houses instead of 1 apartment. So, yeah, I think it's just a different way of doing it. So,
I talked to one developer one time, and this is a developer who will remain nameless, but who's done some amazing work on housing. And he said to me, Peter, we cannot do housing for people less than 60% of the AMI and meet the bottom line. There are 10,000 families in the city of Rochester who live below 30% of the AMI. So that's the kind of figures we need to think about. That housing is just not being produced for the population that most of us around here have experienced and are seeking to support. Unless we start building housing for which people who are either on less than, who are both on 30% or less of the AMI, and or who have handicaps of one thing or another, whether it's addiction, mental health issues, whatever, which means you need supportive housing. Unless we're building intentionally those kinds of buildings, we are going to be dealing with the growing homeless population all the time.
I just want to, before you go, I wanted to add 2 other organizations. Ibero-American Action Development Corporation is creating affordable housing, and a faith community, Gates Presbyterian. They've partnered with Pathstone, and they're opening, don't quote me on this, I think it's 44 units or apartments, and they're going to operate it with the YWCA. So they're I think it's going to open in the spring, and they're going to open it up to a number of people who have substance abuse issues, mental illness, and then the other half of it will just be open to community. So I think they're a great resource to talk to as well, and it's right on their property where their church is.
This is being done in Germany, other countries too, where they're taking like some of those vacant lots and they're putting up these inexpensive fabricated houses, which are maybe $5,000 a piece. And this young man up here was talking about how we're spending upwards of $100,000 per year on homeless. So why have they not looked more into this?
Yeah, it's funny. We just had a discussion about kind of the female housing idea. Like you can pop up houses. We have, you're right, thousands of empty lots. And really it's a zoning issue right now with the city to figure out how to do it properly, and how not to bring down the value of other neighbors' places. So I do think you bring up a great point, and I do think it's a discussion. So at least they're talking about it. That's nice.
Thank you so much for your, all of your presentations and for all the great work that you're doing. Could you just tell us again the name of the church that you mentioned that was partnering for the housing?
Gates Presbyterian. Ooh, sorry. Yes. Yeah. I agree.
Let's
I
eat
agree.
cookies.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.